Hey everyone, and welcome! Today, we're going to dive into an idea so powerful, so game-changing, that it completely rewrote the rules of economics. It's a story all about one man, a single brilliant hypothesis, and the absolute revolution that it kicked off in the world of macroeconomic policy.
So let me just start by asking you this. Could a single idea, just one insight, prove that pretty much the entire playbook for managing a country's economy was built on a total fallacy? Well, that's the intellectual drama we're getting into today. All right, so our story really gets going in the decades right after World War II. This was a time of incredible confidence, Economists really felt like they'd finally cracked the code, that they could tame the wild swings of the business cycle and basically engineer prosperity on demand.
And to do that, economists like Lawrence Klein built these absolutely massive computer models. I mean, we're not just talking about theories on a blackboard. These were incredibly complex systems, tons of equations all working together that treated the entire economy like it was some kind of giant predictable machine. The whole point was to map it all out and then simulate what would happen if you pushed this button or pulled that lever. And the biggest, most important lever on this whole machine, it was something called the Phillips curve. The idea was beautifully simple. There's a stable trade-off. If you want less unemployment, you just have to accept a little more inflation, and vice versa. For policymakers, it was like a menu of economic options they could just choose from to get the best outcome.
Okay, so this right here really sums up the whole philosophy at the time. This Keynesian playbook was all about these huge models that were built on one absolutely crucial assumption, that the way things worked in the past would be the way they'd always work in the future. Policymaking wasn't an art, it was a science, a technical job of just fine-tuning this complicated machine.
But then, the machine broke. I mean, it didn't just sputter, it broke down spectacularly. In the 1970s, the gears completely seized up, and that whole confident era of economic engineering just came to a screeching halt.
And this really gets to the core weakness of that entire playbook. I mean, what happens when the supposedly stable, predictable patterns that you've built your entire system on suddenly just, change?
Well, the answer came in the form of a nasty crisis called stagflation. This was a toxic, nightmare combination of high unemployment and high inflation happening at the exact same time. Now, according to the Phillips curve, according to all those fancy models, this was supposed to be impossible. It was a brutal wake-up call that the relationships everyone took for granted were not stable at all.
And what's so amazing about this slide is just how stark the failure was. The promise was this neat, clean trade-off. The reality? You got the worst of both worlds. The Keynesian models had absolutely zero explanation for this. The machine was broken, and nobody had the instruction manual to fix it.
And this is where our main character, Robert E. Lucas Jr., steps onto the stage. He came along and argued that all those models were missing something absolutely critical. There was a ghost in the machine, and that ghost was messing up all the calculations. And that ghost was us, human expectations.
And I want to be clear, his work wasn't just some fringe theory. It was so profound that it earned him the Nobel Prize in 1995. The committee specifically pointed to his idea of rational expectations, an idea that would completely change the rules of the game for basically every economist and policymaker on the planet. So, what in the world are rational expectations? It's actually a pretty simple but totally revolutionary idea. People are smart. We don't just blindly react to what happened yesterday, we're forward-looking. We use all the information we can get our hands on, including what we think the government is going to do, to anticipate the future and then act on it. We learn. We don't make the same mistakes over and over again.
This slide just nails the difference. The old models were built on what's called adaptive expectations. It's like trying to drive a car forward while only looking in the rearview mirror. You're always reacting to what just happened behind you. Lucas came along and said, no, that's not how people work. We use rational expectations. We look forward, through the windshield, trying to see the curves in the road up ahead.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Because this idea that people are forward-looking, well, it has a devastating knockout punch consequence for that old way of making policy, a consequence that became famous as the Lucas critique. Okay, so let's walk through the logic. It goes like this. A government decides it's going to try and exploit a relationship, like the Phillips curve, to lower unemployment. But people, being rational, see it coming. They anticipate that the policy will cause more inflation, so they start demanding higher wages right now. And in doing that, their behavior completely blows up the very relationship the government was trying to use in the first place. The rules of the game change the second you try to play it. So here's the formal definition. It basically says that any attempt to play the economy based on old data is doomed because the new policy itself becomes a new piece of information that people use to change their behavior. You can't use yesterday's map to navigate today's world because you're the one changing the roads. And it is so important to get this. Lucas's critique wasn't just him saying, hey, people are smart. No, he backed it up with rigorous, hardcore mathematical models. He showed, using equations, how the individual choices of rational people, what we call micro-foundations, had to be the starting point for any serious economic model.
So the Lucas critique didn't just poke holes in the old models, it completely demolished them. In the aftermath, macroeconomics had to be rebuilt, basically from the ground up using a totally new blueprint. And the legacy of this revolution is just immense. Those old Keynesian models, gone. In their place, we got modern models built on rational individuals. You might hear them called DSGE models. The focus of policy shifted from trying to fine-tune everything to establishing credible long-term rules. And this thinking gave us the intellectual foundation for things we kind of take for granted now, like independent central banks whose main job is to keep inflation stable.
So after Lucas, the whole game changed. Economic policy was no longer seen as an engineering problem, managing some passive machine. It became a strategic interaction, a game of chess between policymakers and a public that is always trying to figure out their next move.
And that really leaves us with this final thought to chew on. If that ghost in the machine, human foresight, can't be systematically fooled, then what is the role of a policymaker? Maybe the biggest lesson from Robert Lucas is that economics is less about constantly yanking at the steering wheel of the ship and more about charting a clear, credible, and predictable course that everyone can see and rely on. It's a huge shift in thinking, and it all started with that ghost in the machine. Thanks for digging into this with me.